Hey there, everybody. My name is Tom of MTG Radio, and today is a very special day because today we get to play EDH. So this will be a video for the YouTube channel, and today we're going to play one of my favorite decks that I've made recently. That one being Mirko Vosk. Now, Mirko Vosk has a very special feel to him this time. No mulligans. Instead of doing the classic Dimir Mill deck or Dimir Vampires or something like that, Instead, we're fighting from the shadows this time. This deck I like to call Mirko Vosk Shadowy Army. The idea being that, as you may know from Ravnica lore, the Dimir love fighting from the shadows, and as you may know from Tempest, there are actual creatures with a mechanic called Shadow on them, and that's the idea of this deck. It's using the cards with Shadow from sets like Tempest, and the Cipher spells from Gatecrash, mixing them into this beautiful cavalcade of awesomeness and creating possibly one of my favorite decks in the longest time. A deck that's just gets in damage at all times. That being said, we're going to F8 and start talking about the commanders. I'm playing Mirko Vosk the Mind Drinker. 3 blue black for a flying 2/4. He's a legendary vampire from Gatecrash. From Dragon's Maze. Sorry. From Gatecrash from Dragon's Maze. Very important. Anyways, when he deals combat damage to a player, that player reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal 4 land cards, then puts those cards into their graveyard. Mirko Vosk is actually an excellent general if you are looking to mill your opponents out. That being said, we're not looking to mill our opponents out at all. In fact, that'd actually be pretty bad for us. We don't have any appreciable ways to do it. Here, we're going to suspend Infiltrator Core. He's a 3/1 with Shadow and Suspend. And hopefully start beating him with stuff like Elbrus Binding Blade, which would be just perfectly fantastic. So this is our first Shadow creature. And you'll notice our deck is filled, just chock full of Shadow creatures. The deck list of this deck will be below in the comments. Now, speaking of amazing decks, which ours probably isn't, we're playing against 2 of the strongest decks in the format right now, one being Rafika the Many. 1 green, white, blue for a legendary Human Knight. He's a 3/3 with Exalted. Whenever a creature you control attacks alone, it gains double strike until end of turn. Many signals, one purpose. That one purpose, beating your face in. Turns out Rafika the Many is one of the best Voltron generals. So named because of the classic children's cartoon of the same name. The idea being that you make one very big creature and you just keep suiting them up, and just killing your opponents by just having this amazing advantage from a very good creature. Now you have 2 choices here. We can play Inkfathom Witch or Swiftfoot Boots, considering that our Infiltrator Core is coming down next turn. I don't want a chance not having enough mana, so we're going to just play the Darksteel Ingot, and we're going to tap and pass. Alright, so our Infiltrator Core will come off of Suspend next turn. We get to start beating in. So, speaking of Rafik decks, there's a lot of cards we like to watch out for. Rafika the Many actually being the biggest of them all. It's using the mechanic Exalted, so whenever a creature attacks alone, it's going to get +1/+1, and then it's going to gain double strike if Rafika is also on the battlefield. This leads to this deck playing a lot of just very good evasive threats, or just good cards that give your creatures evasion. Things to watch out for from this deck, definitely the swords. The sword cycle from Mirrodin and then Scars and Mirrodin, Sword of Fire and Ice, among others, just being amazing to give double strike to because they work off of combat damage. Definitely a deck to be reckoned with and one to be scared of. As far as this table is concerned, this is probably the deck I'm the most afraid of. So, gonna watch out for Rafika as much as we can. In the meantime, I'm just going to hide him right over here, and we'll talk about everyone's favorite purple hippo from Alliances, Feldogriff. Feldogriff for 1 green, white, blue is a 1 green, white, blue is a 4/4 legendary, well, Feldogriff. He can pay a green mana to give something trample until end of turn. That opponent then gets a 1/1 green hippo creature. For a single white mana, he's going to gain flying until end of turn, and target opponent gains 2 life. And for a single blue mana, you return Feldogriff to its owner's hand. Target opponent may draw a card. So this will be a group hug style deck. You can notice this from Kami of the Crescent Moon. For double blue, at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. That's going to also count for us, which is super great. We also need to just draw into a couple lands here. We will always shield. We will cast our Infiltrator Core from Suspend because there has been 2 turns. We will draw an additional card due to Kami of the Crescent Moon, and we will go to our next phase. Now we have a couple of choices here as far as what to do. We can lay out Inkfathom Witch and Swiftfoot Boots and equip it, and that's actually what we're going to do. So we're going to cast Inkfathom Witch. Inkfathom Witch actually being an amazing card for this deck. For one black blue, it's a fear ridden 1/1, and for 2 blue black, each unblocked creature becomes 4/1 until end of turn. We do have our first creature with Shadow, so we do want to explain the ability very quickly. Shadow comes for this really cool design where there was a world between worlds in this set, and the idea is the Shadow creatures can only be blocked by other Shadow creatures because they're in the Shadow realm. At the same time, they can only block other Shadow creatures. So very important. Never try and keep your guy back as a blocker when it comes to Shadow. It won't work. It will never work. Your Shadow creatures happen to be the worst blockers ever. So always very important. We are going to send all of our damage at the Maelstrom Wanderer deck, but first I want to explain a common problem with Feldgriff decks that we're probably going to be able to witness today. So Feldgriff decks are known as group hug decks because the card itself leads to giving your opponent's cards for a certain advantage. The cool design idea behind Feldgriff is that although you're giving your opponents a small advantage, you get a better advantage out of it, either by making sure Feldgriff's untargetable, return him to your hand, or by giving him flying for evasion. Your opponent gains 2 life and you have a 4/4 beater. The problem with group hug decks, and that's probably what this deck is going to be, is that they're specifically made, or engineered might be a better word, to allow your opponents to play splashier spells, to play more fun cards, and to just overall have a greater time. You can sound how uplifting and positive I sound while I say it. Here's the problem with Feldgriff decks, especially with group hug decks, which is what Feldgriff is. When you play Feldgriff, you give your opponents advantages, and now this deck may be looking to do that, and that might be the entire object of the game. But it leads to 2 different things. Since your opponents are always playing more big splashy spells, the games tend to go a lot longer than usual, or they end in like 3 turns. I know that's a very big, wide scale, but because your opponents always draw enough cards or get enough lands on the battlefield, not only are you affecting the game in a actual negative way by just leading to a game forming as like a monster of itself. EDH needs a little bit of build-up. It needs those first 4 or 5 turns to kind of get to where it's going. But when you're playing against specific decks, giving them those extra lands, giving those some extra draw spells, gives them such an insurmountable advantage that they run away with the game very quickly. One of those prototypical decks being the Maelstrom Wanderer deck. And so, just to make sure I get the point across, because I know that may have sounded jumbled, the main issue with Feldgriff decks is that they become Kingmaker decks. A Kingmaker deck, unlike a Group Hug deck, Group Hug deck gives an advantage to everybody equally. A Kingmaker deck makes one person king. Feldgriff decks usually tend to be Kingmaker decks because there are certain decks that are set up to take a greater advantage of the benefits given by the Group Hug deck. Maelstrom Wanderer probably being, again, the prototypical example of this. Maelstrom Wanderer for 5 blue, red, green is a 7/5 that gives all your creatures haste and has double cascade. This is the type of deck that loves extra lands, that loves extra draw spells. It needs to make sure that it hits all of his ramp. It needs to make sure that it's able to put a land drop into play every single turn. By playing a Feldgriff deck, you ensure they get that ability and will run away with the game because of it. Is that a bad thing? It depends on your opinion. By running the Group Hug deck, you're ensuring that this deck will... Well, you're almost ensuring this deck will win. Is that bad? That's for you to decide. I'm not the biggest fan of it. I think it's kind of unfortunate. That's kind of one of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of Feldgriff decks in general, is because, again, I'm going to keep saying it just to hammer it in, they really just feel like Kingmaker decks. One person gets an enormous advantage, and the game isn't as fun. That being said, we have to figure out our turn here. We have a couple of options. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 6 mana. We can play Undercity Plague, just to kind of show you what this deck tries to do. For 4 black, target player loses 1 life, discards a card, and then sacrifices a permanent. It's got Cypher. Cypher is this awesome ability that came out of the Dimir guild in Gatecrash, where when that creature deals... when you cast a spell, you're able to encode it onto a creature, and then when that creature deals combat damage, you can recast the spell. Turns out, you can't block shadow creatures in EDH. So we have 6 mana, so we can either play Mirko Vosk and give it haste, or turn both these creatures into 4/1s when we attack. I kind of want to just do the Undercity Plague, because we're probably dead next turn anyways. I know that's a very defeatist attitude to go about it, but I honestly think it's true. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to play Undercity Plague, targeting our Maelstrom Wanderer player. He's going to be forced to lose a life, sacrifice a permanent, and discard a card. Then we're going to Cypher it onto the Inkfathom Infiltrator, and we're going to attack him in again to force him to, again, discard a card, lose a life, and sacrifice a permanent. Is this going to make sure that we're not dead? No. But it's going to slightly decrease the amazing advantage he's getting off of an extra draw step, and just the great spells he's cast so far. So, going to deal that extra damage. I think we almost dealt an equivalent damage of activating Infathom Infiltrator this turn. Now, we do have a semi-long game, that long game being casting Phage and killing somebody. We will want to be able to equip it with Swiftfoot Boots, because it's always embarrassing when Phage gets copied and you die. Actually, it's incredibly embarrassing. So we're going to make sure that doesn't happen to us. Now, I don't know where Sigurd is going. Oh, it doesn't go anywhere. I thought he might attack the Maelstrom Wanderer deck, because this is definitely a problem. Now, let's talk about the Maelstrom Wanderer deck. If you first time watching these videos, you'll notice I talk a mile a minute. I apologize. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments about anything I've said so far. If you have any differing opinions, if you love group hug decks, feel free to defend them. I think they're abominations and just horrible. Okay, so we lost all of our creatures to Sunblast Angel. We will draw 2 cards, because, you know, Fecundity's out. I don't know if I agree with that. Of course I don't agree with it. I got my creatures destroyed. Duh. Sorry, got a little bit sidetracked. Of course I don't agree with it. Okay, so Maelstrom Wanderer decks. They're very, very, very popular recently just because of how good Rug is. Rug being red, blue, green decks are just... Rug ramp decks are very powerful because they exploit a current hole in the EDH metagame. The EDH metagame is dominated by graveyard-based decks, decks with a lot of wrath effects, and Rug decks. And why Rug decks have come to such a prominence is because of the earlier EDH metagame, which was focused explicitly on Wrath effects. It wasn't uncommon about a year ago to be in a game where 11 Wrath effects were played. Legitimately, 11 Wrath effects were played in a game. And so what that caused was people had to find a way to overcome that. One of the best ways to do that was to play Rug good stuff, where all you did was every single turn you kept increasing your land base, because no one was attacking lands, and no one still attacks lands, and increasing the amount of cards in hand until you got to a point where your opponents can't deal with you anymore. Maelstrom Wanderer is the definition of that type of general. Not only can you cast them multiple times, because when your opponent's Wrath Maelstrom Wanderer, you just recast them, and then cast 2 spells because of it, but when your opponent's... But those 2 cards you get always out tempo the Wrath effect your opponent played. So we're going to get Warstorm Surge coming into play here, as well as Maelstrom Wanderer. So Maelstrom Wanderer is going to deal 7 damage to somebody, probably us. And then we're going to also take 7 damage, because Maelstrom Wanderer gives all creatures haste, you know, because that's how life works. So yeah, we're going to take 7 from Maelstrom Wanderer. I expect as much. I guess our other players weren't on the same board as we were, that we should really worry about the Maelstrom Wanderer deck with infinite lands, but that's okay. Maybe we'll just tell them that. Actually, we probably should. So we're going to do something you'll notice in a lot of our videos, which is known as talking to your opponents. Talking to your opponents is super important, especially when they cast stuff like Decimate. So Decimate destroys an artifact, creature, enchantment, and land. He destroyed our command tower and our Swiftfoot Boots. We're going to take 7 damage here. We're also going to draw an extra card. Thank you, Group Hug deck. You've been super helpful. What can we do this turn? And we can cast the Acropolis Region. It's a 6/5. It at least blocks Maelstrom Wanderer. That being said, all the creatures he casts is haste, and he has Warstorm Surge in play, so that seems super useful. We could also cast Thalkos Scout and Dimir Cutpurse. Dimir Cutpurse is a blocker. Thalkos Scout as a card that deals damage. I think that's the only thing we can do in this situation. And now you'll kind of notice the problem that Rug decks put you in. If, per se, we had a Wrath effect in our hand, we wouldn't be able to do anything this turn. Even if you Wrath Maelstrom Wanderer, he just comes back harder. He would just recast Maelstrom Wanderer and get 2 cards off the top of his library. So, the question is, how do you beat Maelstrom Wanderer decks? And, viewer, that's a fantastic, fantastic question. And the answer is, you got to gang up on them. That early damage I was dealing had to be backed up by my opponents also dealing a lot of early damage. Our Maelstrom Wanderer deck is at 28, and as of this point, I don't actually see how we can win the game. Unless either the Rafik deck or the Feldergriff deck was going towards some sort of instantaneous win combo, there actually does not seem to be a way to win. If this is a Wrath effect, it's going to do nothing, which is kind of hilarious. Speaking of hilarious, we're going to remove auto yields because it looks like it is a Wrath of God. or not. This is a Terminus. Terminus being one of the only ways to get rid of... Oh, no, it's Privileged Position. Okay, you just didn't affect the board at all. One of the other ways to deal with Maelstrom Wanderer decks is to tuck Maelstrom Wanderer. Tuck effect is a card like Terminus, Hallowed Burial, or Condemn, or Banishing Stroke, which is a much more recent card that you may know. Basically, it decides to put the creature on the bottom of the library. Very, very important effect to have available in EDH decks to deal with problematic commanders. People like Maelstrom Wanderer, or even Rafika the Many, are very important to put on the bottom of your opponent's decks in case you just don't want to die to them. Just super useful. Speaking of super useful, Sigarda, Host of Herons is on the battlefield. 2 green, white, white for a flying hexproof 5/5. Spells and abilities your opponent's control can't cause you to sacrifice permanents. Always good. Why aren't you attacking? Very good against Eldrazi. Not really that good against the actual EDH metagame. It'll be interesting to see what this deck's able to pull out of its bag of tricks. Seeing a Privileged Position in the deck really reads that this opponent doesn't want us to interact with him. And with Voltron-type decks, that's very common. So I'm excited to see what he's able to do for the rest of the game. That being said, with the board position our Maelstrom Wanderer deck does have, with Warstorm Surge in play, 5 in a red whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, deals damage equal to its power target creature or player, that board position is very hard to work with. We're going to try our best. We're not going to give up on this game yet, but I will say it's definitely going downhill quickly. We need our Felgriff deck to play something that doesn't help everybody, because helping everybody just advances the board state of the player that can use it the most. Gilded Lotus not being a card that helps. Majoka Conda, actually a very interesting spell. Happy to see it here. 3 in a white, whenever a source an opponent controls deals damage to you, that player sacrifices a permanent. Really, Majoka Conda, reminiscent of effects like No Mercy, that just punishes your opponent for please attack. Majoka Conda, reminiscent of effects like No Mercy or Dread, that just punishes your opponents for attacking you. Very common in that instance in decks like Black-White, which uses, again, No Mercy effects that really harm your opponents for attacking you. Very powerful for that simple reason. Ooh, that's a beautiful Lotus Cobra. Lotus Cobra coming into the battlefield here for 1 and a green. It's a 2/1 with landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Looks like he's going to kill Dimir Cuppers. I guess we angered the rug gods early in the game by putting him to 28 and forcing him to sacrifice 2 lands. I am going to defend that. I am going to defend that move here. Also he knows we have Shadow, so we can't block the Maelstrom Wanderer. We definitely should have communicated better with the other players in the game that we needed to make sure that the rug deck wasn't able to get to the kind of position to play stuff like Tooth and Nail all the time. That's definitely our fault. We should have used... I always call it collusion, but really it's just interacting with the table. Although we are playing Magic the Gathering Online, there are 3 actual persons on the other side of that screen. So we should have communicated a lot better our game plan, which was to hopefully eliminate the Maelstrom Wanderer deck before it starts doing amazingly powerful things like casting Balefire Dragon and Rampaging Baloth with haste. So instead, we did not effectively communicate our game plan, and as such are being destroyed for it. We're going to take all that damage to the face, and everyone is just kind of dead. Well, not everyone. I'm mostly dead. I'm not going to lie to you. Yeah. So we're going to take lethal damage here. Lethal damage being exactly what it sounds like. Lethal damage is we're going to lose the game. I will say thank you so much for stopping by and watching this video. I really hope we actually take lethal damage while I do an outro. I will, at the end of the game, I am going to go over the deck a little bit more succinctly, just to show you a lot more that it could do. We are going to play some more games with Mirko Vosk. I really do love this deck. I love showing it off. Looks like we just angered the beast being the rug deck that is currently going to win the game handily. So we'll take our damage and we'll be happy about it. Not happy about it. We'll be sad about it. We'll cry on the inside about it. But at least we were right. So haha, opponents that allowed this to happen, like the group hug deck. So instead of being sarcastic about this, let's actually talk about what's going on. This kind of showcases why I dislike group hug decks. And by kind of, I mean this showcases why I dislike group hug decks. They don't help the board state. They just allow things to explode. And once again, if you're a deck that can take advantage of that, the game's over. We have... I mean, please at least kill us. Alright, so we are going to take lethal damage here from the Rampaging Balos and the Balefire Dragon. Okay, so for those of you that are sitting behind your keyboards arguing, no, Tom, group hug decks are awesome. This is just a bad example of a group hug game. I'd like to say that I really disagree with you. Every group hug deck, every game I've played with a group hug deck has ended in a very similar fashion. Number one, the game isn't affected by you. Group hug decks do this very bad job of pretending to be an arbiter, where you're like, oh, I'm going to counter this key spell so the game continues, and you're just kind of like, at that point, I don't want the game to continue. I want this game to end because you've caused this game to go on for an extra 2 hours. And that's definitely one of the reasons why I dislike group hug decks. So, you can name this video Why Tom Hates Group Hug Decks. You're welcome to do it. That being said, this was a rather short game, so we are just going to upload this one as a little bit of a clip. That being said, as the game begins to end, I do want to mention a couple of things. If you did like the video, let me know in the comments section. I really do want to improve on these videos. I also want to put them out a lot more often. So if you want to see a camera of me while the game goes on, let me know. I'm definitely have that ability. If you want music in the background, also let me know. I know a lot of people like music in the background. That being said, I talk enough that maybe we shouldn't have music in the background. And that's about it. If you have any other suggestions, if you want to see specific decks, feel free to ask. I will post the deck list for this deck in the comments. Additionally, we are using a different resolution. Are we using a different resolution for this video? No, we are using the same resolution for this video. So, if you liked how it was filmed, if I was too loud on the mic, which looks very possible that I was too loud on the mic, please let me know. I don't want to burst out your ears. And overall, have a fantastic night. I'm sure you're all fantastic people. So, I lied. Not over yet. We are just going to go to the deck editor part. Alright, so as that game goes through its final throes of victory, I guess, let's quickly go over the Mirko Vosk deck itself. There's a lot of really fun things you can do with this deck, and I was really sad that we weren't able to showcase them. The game just kind of spiraled into this horrible area of bleh. So let's go over some of the fun cards in this deck. Again, I love all the shadow creatures in here. Thalkos Myths, like anything that says Thalkos on this deck was just automatically in. All the Dothy creatures, we have them in. In fact, I'm going to just pull all of the shadow creatures to the side so you can check out how many are actually in this deck. And there's it's so much fun to see how many silly shadow creatures are in here, and actually how good some of them are. I was really surprised to see the power of some of these creatures. So we have We have 19 shadow creatures in this deck, which read as 19 unblockable creatures, and they're really great, and there's a lot of really cool ways to play off of them. One of the better ways was Inkfathom Witch. For 1 blue-black, it's a fear with 1/1, but for 2 blue-black, each unblocked creature becomes a 4/1 until end of turn. This allows all of these 2/1s, 1x1s, 1/1s, oh sorry, Dothy Embrace is an enchantment, to just become super huge and attacking our opponents as 4/1s. It usually anthems our team by 2, and it's a super important card for this deck. Speaking of super important, you know what one of the most fun things you can do in Magic? If your answer was turn your creatures into pirates, you're correct. 2 blue for an enchantment out of Mercadian Mass. We have Coastal Piracy. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. This is definitely one of the engines of the deck. Biden of Thassa, a card from Theros, is another card I do want to add to the build. That being said, as of right now, that date being October 2nd, Theros is not online yet, and it cannot be bought, otherwise it would be in this deck immediately. Speaking of in this deck immediately, another very important card for this deck is Quietus Spike. 3 mana to give the creature Death Touch, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player loses half his or her life rounded up. Quietus Spike, one of the main ways to actually kill our opponents. And just to touch on one last card, and then I'll let y'all go. I want to talk about Stolen Identity, and how I think this card is busted. 4 double blue for a rare sorcery. You put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy target artifact or creature. It's got Cypher. I can't tell you how many times this card's won me the game. Well, I can. Like, 3 times. It's won me the game like 3 times. Stolen Identity, especially with Cypher, and especially in this deck, always hits for multiple permanents, always hits for multiple creatures, always hits for multiple artifacts, and it's the artifacts that really kills your opponent. Because what you'll do is you'll cast Stolen Identity, you'll target their best creature, you'll get that best, well, no, this is the real way to play Stolen Identity. If your opponent has mana up, but it's not a counter spell, what you do is you play Stolen Identity, and you actually target their artifact first to make sure it resolves. So a good idea is to cast Stolen Identity and target something as innocuous as a Darkshield Ingot. It ramps you up by 1, usually you actually get a Gilded Lotus. It ramps you up by 1 or even 3, and then the ciphered spells, you don't care if they get negated by a creature dying. So you can copy creatures with the Stolen Identity, encoded with the encoded Stolen Identity in order to just get the creatures that you really, really want. Also, we're playing Rexiel because, you know, it's a Kraken. So that'll be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. There will be more posted soon. As of right now, I'm actually having some troubles with my internet connection as far as streaming is concerned. That's why you haven't seen me stream as much as usual. If you do want to check out that stream, I do stream EDH Monday, Wednesday, Fridays from 7:30 to 11 p.m. On twitch.tv/MTGRadio. Once again, thank you so much for stopping by, and thanks for tuning in.